Mr. President, I rise today again to speak about the North Dakotans who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving our country in the Vietnam War. Since March, I've had the honor of learning from families about the lives of their sons, brothers, husbands, fathers, and uncles who died during the Vietnam War. Before speaking about the 13 of the 198 North Dakota young men who didn't return home from Vietnam, I want to first tell you about Dan Stenvold of Park River. Dan is a Vietnam veteran who survived the war. While a student at Sargent Central High School, Dan thought about joining the military. After graduation, he felt he should grow up before going to college, and he enlisted in the Army. He was sent to Vietnam and served 3 continuous tours of duty there. His records count that he was in Vietnam for 802 days. After returning home from Vietnam, Dan enrolled in college at North Dakota State School of Science in Wapton so he could fulfill his dream of playing college football. The combination of Dan's time in Vietnam and a football knee injury made Dan feel old, and he left college. He spent a 33-year career with Polar Communications in Park River. In 1999, the North Dakota Vietnam Veterans of America voted him their state president, and he has served in that position for the last 16 years. For the last 6 years, he has served on the National Board of Vietnam Veterans of America. The national president asked him to run for another 2-year term, and I wish Dan well in that upcoming election. Dan also serves his community as a member of the DAV, the AMVETS, VFW, and American Legion, and he is currently in his 3rd term as mayor of the city of Park River in North Dakota. Dan is proud of his 3 wonderful children and his 7 grandchildren. Agent Orange exposure education is one of his top priorities. He has seen his own family affected by the side effects of Agent Orange, and he's grateful to the North Dakota State Legislature for once again approving funding for education and outreach related to Agent Orange exposure. So thank you to Dan for his continuing service to our country, and please, Dan, keep up your good work on behalf of the citizens of your community and Vietnam veterans all across this country. Richard Rich Boehm. Rich was born on June 23, 1951. He was from Mandan. He served in the Army's 198th Infantry Brigade. Rich died on March 26, 1971. He was 19 years old. Rich was one of 6 children. All 3 boys served our country in the military, Marvin and Clarence in the Army National Guard, and Rich in the Army. Rich served in Vietnam with Myron Johnson from Mandaree, and they became very close friends. Rich was engaged, and Myron was going to be his best man. Keith Nolan's book about the sappers in the wire, The Life and Death of Fire Base Mary Ann, includes details of the day that Rich and Myron died. Rich and Myron were in a foxhole together, ran for safety, and they were both shot in the back and killed. Dennis Bullinger was assigned to escort Rich's body home, and his family knew Rich's family. Dennis continues to serve our state and my community of Mandan as the current Mandan Chief of Police. Rich's brother Marvin says he's grateful to Rich's squad leader who came from Texas, who contacted him from Texas and shared memories and photos of Rich during his time in Vietnam. Larry Jacobson. Larry was from Norma. He was born March 15, 1949. He served in the Army's 1st Aviation Brigade. Larry was 21 years old when he died August 26, 1970. He was the youngest of 6 children and grew up on his family's farm near Norma. He attended grade school in Norma and high school in Kenmure. His best friend in high school, Craig Livingston, remembers Larry as a shy person who didn't have an enemy. Larry's oldest brother, Alan, remembers the week Larry was killed in Vietnam. The family had been in Fargo celebrating his sister's graduation from nursing school. They had planned to host a party at home too, but when they arrived home, there was a sergeant and a captain waiting for them to deliver the news of Larry's death. This year on Memorial Day weekend, a large memorial was dedicated at the Mouse River Park honoring Renville County veterans. That memorial includes Larry's photo and images of the Soldier's Cross and a helicopter like the one Larry was riding in when it was shot down and he was killed. Carl Woods. Carl was from Botno. He was born June 8, 1933. He served as a Navy pilot. Carl was 32 years old when he died on September 28, 1965. His father, Monte, also served our country during World War I, and 6 of the 8 boys in Carl's family served in the military. Carl was an honor student in high school and in college, where he made all-conference football. He then chose to enlist in the Navy, and he served our country as a Navy pilot for over 12 years, reaching the rank of lieutenant commander. While serving in the Vietnam War, Carl's plane was hit by an anti-aircraft missile. Instead of bailing out over North Vietnam, Carl maneuvered the plane 20 miles to the Gulf of Tonkin, where he died after his parachute failed to open. The family is grateful to Carl's wingman for sharing with them the details of Carl's service and extraordinary flight skills the day he died. In addition to his brother, Carl left behind his wife Elaine and 3 children, Mark, Jennifer, and Catherine. Carl is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. This summer, the Botno AMVETS Post 25 is going to rename themselves the Carl J. Woods Memorial Post 25 in honor of Carl's service and his sacrifice. Joel Ellingson. Joel was from Rowlett. He was born January 21st, 1945. He served in the Navy. Joel was 22 years old when he died on June 26, 1967. Joel was the oldest of 3 boys. Each were 3 years apart in age. At Rowlett High School, Joel played in the band. Right after high school graduation, Joel enlisted in the Navy. After serving 2 years, he returned home and worked in the local grocery store. Because of the Vietnam War draft, Joel re-enlisted in hopes that his brothers, Dennis and Doyle, would not have to serve in Vietnam. Dennis said of Joel's re-enlistment, "I think he did that to try to protect me. He didn't think they'd take 2 brothers." David Hagley. David was from Napoleon. He was born September 28, 1948. He served in the Army's 25th Infantry Division. David died February 8, 1969. He was 20 years old. He was the 5th of 8 children, and he grew up on his family's dairy farm. His brother Tim also served our country in the Marines. David's family said that he was such a kind person and a hard worker. They remember his jokes and how much he enjoyed playing fun pranks on people. David's letters home to his family requested 3 things he and his fellow soldiers desired most: Kool-Aid, baked goods, and dry socks. David's mother gave David's niece, Veronica, a box she filled with David's things, like the letters he mailed home from Vietnam and his wallet. She said that Veronica would know what to do with them. About 3 months before David's mother passed away at age 95, Veronica finished David's scrapbook, and his mother thought it was perfect. Gary Klein. Gary was from Mott. He was born November 22, 1947. He served in the Marine Corps' Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, 3rd Marine Division. Gary was 19 years old when he died on May 27, 1967. He was 3rd from the youngest of 9 children. His sister Arlene said that Gary was an easygoing kid who was lighthearted and never caused any trouble. She remembers the cartoons he liked to draw. Gary chose to enlist in the Marines to serve his country. When he went home during Christmas time on leave, he told Arlene and her children, "I won't see you again, but you may see me." He died almost exactly 1 year after he graduated from high school. Randy Lee Hansen. Randy was born October 23, 1948. He was from South Dakota, but he was living in Williston when he enlisted. He served in the Army's 1st Signal Brigade as a field radio repairer. Randy died on Easter Sunday, April 6, 1969. He was only 20 years old. Randy's brothers Jim and Mike served our country in the Navy, and his stepbrother Arthur also served in the Army. Randy's brother Jim remembers Randy liked to fish. Jim believed Randy had some great stories from his time fishing, as many fishermen do. While his brothers, stepbrothers, and stepsister and mother remained in South Dakota, Randy attended Williston High School, where his father was working in Williston as a bricklayer. In 1966, Randy enlisted in the Army before he graduated from high school. The product of a service-oriented family, Randy felt it was important that he serve his country. Fred Johnson. Fred was born November 3rd, 1939. He grew up in Watford City and in Leeds. He served in the Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Fred was 27 years old when he died on January 20th, 1967. Fred's wife's name was Jacqueline, and they had 1 son and 3 daughters. Their oldest child, Richard, said that Fred loved to hunt and fish. Fred's dad was a game warden, and Fred would go to work with his dad sometimes. They would bring home injured animals and nurse them back to health. Among the most memorable animals were a white owl, a baby skunk that behaved like a pet cat, and a raccoon that he kept for 6 years. After high school, Fred joined the Army. He served for 7 years before he was killed in action in Vietnam on his 2nd tour of duty. Fred's son, Richard, remembers going fishing with his dad often and fishing together the week before Fred left for Vietnam on his 2nd tour of duty. Fred's brother, Robert, said he took Fred to the airport before he returned to Vietnam the last time. Fred was scared and didn't know if he'd be back again. Fred died shortly thereafter when his vehicle hit a landmine. Lyle Johannes. Lyle was born June 25th, 1949, and spent his high school years in Cullum. He served in the Army as a radio operator. Lyle died January 29th, 1970. He was 20 years old. He was the oldest of 4 children. His youngest sister, Sally, said that Lyle was a happy person who didn't get rattled by anything. He loved a good joke and had lots of friends. Sally said, "You never want to turn your back on him because you never know what he might do." He was a daredevil who loved motorcycles, had a number of Hondas and crashes over the years. He spent a lot of time hanging over the engine of a car. He'd buy old cars and fix them up. He also worked on the cars of elderly women who lived in town. After high school, he attended a technical college in Denver for mechanics. Lyle was glad to be in the Army, serving in Vietnam. He kind of adopted a young Vietnamese boy. The boy really liked blue jeans and a turtleneck sweater, so Lyle asked his mom to send them for him. She sent them as well as other things, but for packing materials, she put popcorn in Lyle's packages. When the packages arrived, the soldiers would eat the stale popcorn because they were so happy to have something from home. Lyle was accidentally killed by friendly fire. Since his death, the family occasionally finds items someone leaves on Lyle's grave. Lyle had shipped cashmere sweaters home for the family as Christmas presents in late 1969. The package arrived after his funeral in January of 1970. Eric Nadeau. Eric was born November 12, 1948. He was from Grand Forks and was a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. He served in the Army's 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles. Eric died May 26, 1969, just days before his tour of duty was scheduled to end. He was 20 years old. He was the eldest of his family and had 3 sisters. Eric's sisters remember how much he loved hunting game in the Turtle Mountains before he enlisted in the Army, and they think that's part of the reason why he joined the armed services. Everyone liked Eric. He had a circle of friends that he grew up with, and if he were ever in town on break from service, Eric and his best friend Dale were inseparable. Wherever Dale was, one could find Eric and vice versa. His sister remembers a time when Eric came home and surprised his mother. She and her mother were playing bingo in the local church basement. When he walked into the room, everything stopped, and everyone stood up and sang the national anthem. Eric was shocked and thrilled. Eric died when his company was outnumbered and overrun. He jumped back in to save his crew members and did save some, but was killed in the process. Eric's sister thinks of Eric not only as her brother, but her hero. Fred Jansonius. Fred was born June 23rd, 1948. He was from Jamestown. He served in the Army's 9th Infantry Division. Fred died February 2nd, 1968. He was only 19 years old. He was the oldest of 4 children. His sister Claire said that Fred was a gentle soul and that his younger siblings looked up to him. In high school, Fred was a good student and enjoyed photography, golf, and tennis. After graduation, he attended Drake University and studied journalism. One of his Drake professors told Fred's class, "To be a good journalist, you really need to see the world." Fred's draft number was high, but he was deferred for being in college. So he quit college and traveled to New York City to see part of the world while waiting to be drafted. Claire shared some of Fred's letters he wrote home to his family, which revealed a talent for writing and a wisdom of someone who had definitely seen his share of the world in his 19 years. Many of his letters included vivid descriptions of Fred's experiences in Vietnam, so you could imagine Fred sleeping in a cemetery, using a bag of grenades for a pillow, or his fellow soldiers drinking Coca-Colas and using their imaginations to create their own entertainment. After Fred was killed in Vietnam, his casket arrived in Jamestown on the train. The same conductor that drove the train the day Fred left to go to basic training was driving the train that delivered Fred's body back to Jamestown. About a year ago, one of Fred's officers, Lee Mormon, was traveling the United States, visiting the graves of the soldiers he knew in Vietnam. Lee told Fred's family that Fred liked to read and was well-liked by everyone. Gregory Kruger. Gregory was born March 1st, 1949. He was from Garrison. He served in the Army's 173rd Airborne Division. Gregory died July 17th, 1970. He was 21 years old. He was the youngest of 3 boys. His brother Stephen said that Gregory was hardworking, responsible, and well-liked by everyone who knew him. Stephen remembered that Gregory loved everything to do with the farm. He had fond memories of working with Gregory, hauling many bales of hay on Saturdays. Their brother Fred continues to farm that family farm today. Gregory had a special relationship with a nearby farmer who trusted him at a young age to run his farm equipment and to help on the farm. Gregory had hoped to eventually take over the neighbor's farm after completing his service in Vietnam. The Heritage Park in Garrison is currently in the process of adding a stone memorial in memory of Gregory's service and his family's sacrifice. Richard Hovland. Richard was from Williston, and he was born August 12, 1946. He served in the Army's 20th Engineering Brigade. Richard was 21 years old when he died on January 31st, 1968. He was one of 4 children, and his family and friends called him Ricky. Growing up, Richard was active in the Boy Scouts. He played baseball and sang in the choir. His sister Deanne remembers his beautiful voice and him singing country music in their living room with his friend Charles Hanson. Deanne thought she and her brother were the coolest when he would drop her off in that school in his Chevy Impala. She looked up to Richard very much. When he left for Vietnam, she was in junior high and was in awe about what he was going to do. Deanne said that Richard was a fun-loving and family-oriented man who was especially kind and good with their brother Dwayne, who had Down syndrome. Richard always mentioned Dwayne in his letters he sent home from Vietnam. After completing his service in Vietnam, Richard had plans to go to college and become a farmer. Deanne has drawings that Richard made of the farmhouse he wanted to build on the land he was picking out in the Williston area. His parents, Arlene and Oscar, often said that Richard wanted to farm and loved the land so much that he didn't realize his true calling was becoming an architect. These are just some of the stories of North Dakotans who sacrificed their lives on behalf of our country in Vietnam. And I have to say, every time I do this, I wonder who would they be today? Would they be standing here instead of me? But I do know that the men and women in uniform in our country continue to serve when they take the uniform off. And I know that our country suffers a great loss anytime we lose a young man or a young woman in service of our country. And that loss must be remembered, it must be respected, and we can never forget. In this anniversary and commemoration of the Vietnam War, it's so important that we spend our time talking about the sacrifices that our country and our servicemen gave in Vietnam and continue to give through the ravages of Agent Orange, the issue that Dan worked so hard on, and continue to suffer the post-traumatic stress that was part of that service. Continue to overrepresent us in the homeless populations and populations of people who continue to be troubled from the experience that they had in Vietnam. And so today we celebrate these lives. We think about what they might be, and we offer a very humble and grateful thank you to all the family members who have helped us with these memorials, but who have experienced this loss in a way that we will never understand.